If we're being real, adult life is completely overwhelming a large portion of the time. Bare minimum, you got to take care of your mind. You got to take care of your body. Some of us believe you got to take care of your spirit or your soul as well. You probably have to go to work or school or maybe both. You have a house to clean and organize and maintain. You got a bunch of appliances that you got to make sure are working. You have finances to manage. You're supposed to also, somewhere in there, have a social life and have hobbies and find ways to keep yourself entertained and or distracted from all the stress and trauma that's constantly happening around you. Oh, and don't forget, you're supposed to spend a third of your day sleeping. So you only have 66% of it to do all those things that I just said. It's ridiculous. And those are really, if we're being real, those are just the basics. Like that, what I just said is pretty much considered the bare minimum of human functioning, right? If you have goals above and beyond just functioning at the bare minimum level of society, you might have even more responsibilities or even more expectations than what I just described. Did I even mention kids? I didn't think I mentioned kids. A lot of us, myself included, have kids. That's a pretty big responsibility. Or maybe you have a partner who you're supposed to like spend time with and date and love. It's a lot. It's really, really a lot. And I am on record as a clinical psychologist just stating this. I think it's completely reasonable that we feel utterly overwhelmed by the basic structure of life sometimes. I think it's completely reasonable that sometimes it just feels like too much, that sometimes the weight of all these expectations feels like it could just crush us. I feel that way too. I get it. I am not criticizing or invalidating anyone feeling that way. That being said, I do think that what appears to be the default human reaction to that feeling of being completely overwhelmed is entirely maladaptive and tends to just keep digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. I know that for myself, my instinctual reaction when I feel overwhelmed by responsibility is to avoid responsibility. All the things I just said, all those basic obligations and responsibilities, some of which I've chosen, some of which just have been put on me by the fact that I was born and exist, I tend to want distance from them when I feel overwhelmed. And I tend to want to spend my time on very, very simple things that require little to nothing of me. Stupid TV shows, scrolling on my phone, maybe video games, things that don't require a lot of brain power or a lot of engagement. Also noticed about myself that no matter how much I indulge those impulses when I feel overwhelmed, I never actually forget, fully anyway, about how overwhelmed I feel. In fact, what it does is it basically creates this extra layer of guilt on top of everything else I was already feeling. So I was overwhelmed. Now I'm overwhelmed and feel like I'm lazy because I'm not doing anything about the fact that I'm overwhelmed. I'm not doing anything to get myself out of this hole. I'm not shrinking my to do list. I'm not accomplishing things. I am just distracting and avoiding from my own life. I'm basically trying to not exist for a while. And no matter how long I do that for, it never seems to satisfy me. No matter how much of that I grant myself, I always end up feeling worse at the end of it because I'm in the exact same situation as I was before, only it's probably a little bit worse now because some amount of time has passed, and yet the amount of things on my shoulders pushing me down into the earth has not gotten any smaller. In fact, it has probably gotten bigger because one or two other things have probably happened that requires my attention since the moment I kind of ducked out of my life for a little bit. I try to think of our brain power, and I know that's kind of like a meaningless word. What is brain power? Basically, like it's a combination of your mental energy, which is it's a real thing, right? You have a limited amount of mental energy, and at some point, you can be completely mentally depleted, even if your day was not physically demanding. A little bit of a tangent, I know, but if mental energy did not exist, I could do my job for 16 hours a day. My job is not the least bit physically demanding. I have one of the most sedentary jobs on the planet. So if the only way we could get exhausted was through physical exertion, I would never get tired at work. Let me tell you, friends, that's not true. I get completely wiped out by long days sometimes because my job is extremely psychologically or mentally demanding. I have to get to, I should say, because I do love what I do. I feel so blessed and so privileged to be in the position I'm in. But it is hard. I for, several consecutive hours every day, basically enter into someone else's world, to some degree, feel a portion of the distress they're feeling, and then try to help them navigate out of it. It is a hard thing to do. I'm not going to lie to you. I love it, but it's hard and it's draining and it's tiring. And you may also have a job that's not terribly physically demanding, but is very emotionally or psychologically demanding, like mine is. So, back to the actual metaphor, I kind of lost sight of the ball for a second there. If you think of your mental energy as being kind of like the water coming out of a hose, like a garden hose, I'm sure you know that if you just hold a garden hose in your hand and turn the water on full blast, the hose does not come out with a lot of velocity because it's coming out of a pretty wide opening, which means it is fairly widely distributed over a broad surface area. You can drink from that hose if you want, right? You can use it to water your plants and it won't damage them. But if you take your thumb and you cover up 90% of the opening of the garden hose, the same amount of water is coming out. You've not gained any water. But suddenly, that relatively calm, kind of waterfall looking stream of liquid basically becomes a dangerous weapon, right? Like you could not drink from that. It would choke you. If you water your plants with that, it will probably rip them out of the ground. You might even be able to take off like siding or paint from your house or your deck with that very, very focused stream of water. That is the visual that I want you to keep in mind as we're talking about psychological minimalism, which is today's topic. If you take the same amount of brain power and just distill it into a more focused form, so you're not spread so thin across 20 different responsibilities at the same time, you will be dramatically more effective in the areas you remain focused on. And you may actually be able to make some tangible progress on that seemingly never ending list of obligations and responsibilities. So, when I feel completely overwhelmed and when all I want to do is just basically exist the bare minimum amount for a while, I actually do a complete opposite of what I feel like doing. And this is sort of an offshoot of a DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy strategy called O2E or opposite to emotion. The idea behind O2E, and this is my wording, this is not how Marshall Linehan words it, but depression and anxiety are almost like parasitic in nature. What I mean by that is depression and anxiety make you want to do certain things and not do certain things, right? And if you indulge those impulses, if you do what you feel like doing and don't feel like you don't do what you don't feel like doing, there we go, when you're depressed or when you're highly anxious, you will feel more depressed and more anxious because the behavioral urges that you experience are urges that will strengthen the symptoms that you were experiencing. Opposite then is also true. If you do the last thing on earth that you want to do when you're depressed or when you're anxious, it will probably expedite your journey out of that dark place. So when I just want to do nothing and have no obligations and have no responsibilities, I actually double down on only taking care of my obligations and responsibilities. I actually, and I know, okay, you're going to think I'm crazy. Please bear with me to the end of the video. I really think I have something here for you guys. I actually shut out hobbies and like extra optional stuff because although I do believe those are valuable things, they are like we need recreation, we need leisure, we need joy, we need play. I agree. They're not going to get you out of a state of being overwhelmed. They're not. They're just a distraction. And they keep that hose, they keep your stream of water, they keep the flow of your psychological energy very broadly distributed. Like, man, I got like 9 things I need to do, but I'm so worn out. Like, I also need to play video games for an hour. Well, that's not a need, though. That's a want. It is. In that moment, by the end of the day, you are going to feel so much better about yourself if rather than cutting out the things you actually need to do, you cut out the things that you don't need to do. Because that's what's going to focus your energy more and help you actually wipe some things out of your giant list of stressors. I also borrowed some elements of this strategy from Dave Ramsey. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dave Ramsey, he's a financial advisor who helps people get out of debt using a couple principles that he calls the baby steps and the debt snowball system. So the idea with a debt snowball is, just like I was talking about at the beginning of this video, how we get overwhelmed by life in general, many people are also overwhelmed by their financial obligations because so many of us have either a mortgage or rent, right? At least one car payment, sometimes more, often a couple credit cards, maybe a student loan or two, maybe some medical debt. We may have five, six, seven, eight different forms of debt. We also have bills that we have to pay every month. And most of us are probably trying to save for retirement to some degree as well. So you have this limited amount of income. You're trying to spread it across so many different things. And the net result of trying to do everything all at once is that you often end up feeling like you're not getting anywhere because the numbers that are supposed to shrink, barely shrink. And the numbers that are supposed to grow barely grow from one month to the next. So you're out there grinding, working your butt off, and you just don't see the needle moving very far. What he encourages people to do is pause the 401k, pause the retirement, live on an absolute shoestring budget, make the bare minimum payments on every form of debt but one. Start with the smallest debt you have and just go as hard as you can on that one thing. And the idea is that rather than making a teeny bit of progress on everything every month, you basically pause everything except for you're making massive progress on one thing. And maybe you get one credit card paid off in 3 months that would have taken you 3 years otherwise. Now you have one obligation, one stressor completely gone. It's done, it's taken care of, and then you move on to the next biggest one and you go from there. I don't think this only works for money. I think this works for life in general too, because a lot of times these big stressors that we have, some of them are just ongoing, right? Some of them are never ending. Some of them can be solved, and we have such precious little to give to them. We don't make any real progress towards solving the things that are already on our to-do list while we're accumulating more and more stressors, more and more responsibilities, and we're trying to work on everything all at once, just devoting a little bit of time, a little bit of energy here and there to all these things. If you can pause some of those obligations for a while, and that's why I recommend, it sounds crazy. When you get this feeling, don't worry about your hobbies for a little bit. Just pause as many things as you can and go all in on one problem. Maybe you go all in on like, okay, I need to fix the stove today. We haven't been able to cook a proper meal for like 2 weeks. And, every now and then I have 5 minutes and I kind of mess around with it to see if I can figure out what's wrong with it. No, today's the day. Today, I am not going to do anything else other than the absolute bare minimum of like eat, sleep, and go to work until I solve this one problem. Nothing else matters until I get this thing taken off my to-do list for the immediate future because the only thing that's going to get me out of this hole, the only thing that's going to make my stress level shrink is if something actually gets taken off my list. No amount of forgetting, no amount of distraction, no amount of procrastination is really going to make me feel better because I'm not going to be able to forget that I am completely overwhelmed by my life right now. And the only solution to me being overwhelmed by my life right now is to have one less thing to do. Basically, it's my solution to time and energy debt, which I think is something that we probably all have felt. And I'm betting every single person watching or listening to this, to some degree, feels that sense of time and energy debt right now. Like you wake up and you're already tired, and I don't just mean, the first 5 minutes of the day when you're supposed to be tired because you're not fully awake yet. I mean, like, if you've had a lot of those days in a row where you just never wake all the way up, you know what I'm talking about. You're probably in an energy debt. And I think the way we get out of an energy debt is the same way we get out of a time debt because you don't only get exhausted during the day by doing things, you also get exhausted just by knowing you have to do things. Your mental to-do list can crush you even if you don't work on it, even if you don't do any of those things, because just conceptualizing it and remembering it all day long is exhausting and is draining. And we need to shorten it, ever have any hope of getting out of that state. I know that this is very countercultural advice in general, but probably especially coming from a mental health professional, because the majority of people in my field are going to tell you to do the exact opposite of what I just told you to do. They're going to say, when you're overwhelmed, you need to take a break. You need to go out with friends. You need to spend some time on your hobbies. You need to get away from the stress. And if that works for you, please go ahead and do it. Like, don't not do something that's working just because I said something else. Because people are different, brains are different. I think very rarely in mental health do we find a one size fits all approach. I also know that those were all the things that every supervisor, professor, mentor, therapist I've ever had has told me to do. And it's never worked. It's never worked for me because I never am able to fully rest into inactivity. I'm never able to completely lose myself in whatever the thing that I'm supposed to be losing myself in is, when I know that as soon as this is over, I'm going to go back to a nightmarish to-do list that I feel completely overwhelmed by. Only thing that's ever going to make me personally feel better in the moments like that is take one of the rocks out of my backpack to lighten my load. It's the only solution for me. I don't know if this is just a weird Scott brain thing, but like I cannot trick myself into believing that I'm not horribly stressed out when I am. It just, I don't know. I think I can't be hypnotized too. I think I have the same problem. Like I don't think I'm not trying to make myself sound like super smart or anything. I just think that I can't be tricked, which is really unfortunate because there's many times that I'm like, someone please just trick me. Like just make me believe everything's fine. I would love that. Never worked. Never, ever, ever. And I just don't think that the solution to being overwhelmed is to ignore your obligations or your responsibilities. Just as I don't think the solution to being in crippling financial debt is to incur more debt. I think the only way out of these deficit states that we can so easily find ourselves in is to start to chip away at them, hopefully as quickly and efficiently as possible so that we experience a tangible sense of progression, so that we really believe we're actually getting somewhere and we could someday get out of this. And it's so much like finances because so many people just accept, I'll be in debt forever. So is everyone else. There's no way out of it, and I just have to live with it. That's the American way. I think we also accept that with our time and energy. Everybody feels like crap. No one has enough energy. No one really feels good. No one really has a good life. So it doesn't really say anything about me or my strategies or my coping techniques if I feel that way too, because so does everybody else. I don't think that's true. I think most people feel that way because they're all buying into the same cultural norms that this is just life. This is just how it is. This is how it's always going to be no matter what you do. If you feel that way and you have not attempted the psychological minimalism strategy that I am proposing here, if you have not, when you felt completely overwhelmed by life, narrowed your focus to just the absolute most important, most essential parts of your being and only done those things until you feel better and feel like you're actually getting somewhere, please just humor me. Just try it. I never in a million years would have believed it worked because it's so against everything I've been told and taught. And I'm telling you, I don't feel that way anymore. But for, every now and then when like everything goes wrong all at once, sure, yeah. But that chronic sense of being overwhelmed, that every day is taking more out of me than I can replenish and repay, I don't feel that way anymore. Not all the time. Blips on the radar now. Really bad weeks, really rough weeks, sure. More often than not, no. One. And I believe this is the main reason why. Because I do the exact opposite of what I feel like doing in those moments where I feel overwhelmed. Because those are the moments where I feel like my emotions are going to lead me astray. Because there's a part of my brain that basically doesn't appear to have ever matured beyond age 5. And that part of my brain just wants to ignore, avoid, seek pleasure, and shut down when life gets hard. But I don't think that's ever going to take me in the right direction. So I choose not to listen to it anymore. Please let me know if this works for you. I'd love to hear about your experiences with this, or just let me know what you think. Does it make you hate me? Do you think I'm full of crap? Do I seem like what's the term? Like a Sigma male grind set bro now? I hope not, because that's definitely not who I am. I get that this might have, components of that, but really, this is just something I found that helps me. I hope it helps you too. Take care. See you next time.